Hello again. We have another great lesson. It's called The Story of Our Numerals, and it's the story of the coming of mathematics, the prerequisites for this lesson. So, the story of the coming of the universe, the story of the coming of life, the story of the coming of humans, and the story of the coming of language. You will need various charts as you did with the story of the coming of language. So, you have your Babylonian numerals 1, 10, 60, and 23. You don't have to have all of them represented because the children will figure out how to add and subtract. Egyptian numerals on a little chart. You can look these up on Google. You'll want 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and a million. And then we have our Greek numerals 1, 5, 10, 100, and 1,000. And then we have our Roman numerals. The Roman numerals are important because you will be using these for addition and subtraction. And as you study ancient civilization, you'll be doing more work with Roman numerals. And it's good mental math for the children too. Okay, so you'll want to have the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greek, and the Roman charts. And here is the story. All of the children in the classroom will come together. I want to tell you a story. Children, you don't know how long ago humans began to speak, but they eventually did, right? We speak, we talk with each other. So when humans did begin to speak, they probably used words. Just as we have reasons to use numbers today, people of early civilizations also needed to use numbers. Why do you think they needed to use numbers? And then the children may share some information. The cavemen needed to know how many animals to kill to feed their family. They needed to know how big the animals were. They needed to know how big the animals needed to be. They needed to know how big their weapons needed to be. When early man found a cave, he needed to know what? How many people would fit in that cave? Whether or not it would be big enough for the clan or the family of people that needed to be sheltered. Of course, early humans had to calculate how far they had to go to hunt the animals they were looking for. And they needed to discover how much food they needed to feed their family. People have discovered that every language has some type of reference to numbers. Some of languages only use numbers 1 and 2. Then some only have the language for the number 1. Generally speaking, there seems to be evidence that people from the beginning of time have had some sort of idea of quantities and numbers, how to use mathematics without knowing that it was actually mathematics. How do you suppose that people from long ago kept a record? For example, if one hunter from an ancient civilization were to ask another hunter how many deer he saw, the hunter may have made marks on a stick or on a stone to relay his message. Or he could have relayed his message by using his hands. Remember, that's why it's natural for us to want to count on our fingers. In any case, it is probably true that the earliest people spoke this number language and eventually expressed it in some sort of writing. Do you remember when we were studying the beginning of language, the first group of people to create a written form were called the Phoenicians? The Babylonians lived in the same area of Mesopotamia. They invented a form of numbers where they would use a stylus and clay, and they could make numbers like this. This was 1, this was 10, this was 20, this is 23, 2 10s, then 1, 2, 3. The Babylonians. We have to be thankful for our Babylonians because they helped us create numbers. The numbers were not as the same, however, as we use today. And the people used wedge-shaped marks to indicate their numbers, as I showed you. Kind of a cool little tool, I think, especially if you're working with clay. The people were merchants who stored records. So they had to keep information about how many things they were giving, how many things they were getting. and how to keep their business going. We know that these people had a numerical language because they preserved their records. Then we had the Egyptians. The Egyptians also developed a written number language. They wrote on stone as well, and their language of numbers was symbolic. For example, their symbol for a million looks something like this. Ooh. Though closer in resemblance, their numbers still look different from the ones that we use today. They looked more like this. Okay? A 1 was a staff, a 10 was a heel bone, 100 was a scroll, 1,000 was a lotus flower, 10,000 was a pointing finger, 100,000 was a tadpole, and a million was a man in astonishment. Our Egyptian numbers. Of course, that doesn't look like the numbers that we use today, does it? The Greeks came along and invented a numerical system that was much more logical, but still different from our writing. 1, 5, 10, 100, and 1,000. Notice the decimal system and lots of counting by tens. The Greeks came along and invented their numerical system. The Romans developed an even more sophisticated number system. At this time, you look here. So we have a 1, a 5, a 10, a 50, a 100, a 500, and 1,000. What about the rest of the signs that we use to indicate numbers? The first people that we found to match ours was in a cave in India about 2,000 years ago. Well, people from India traded with people that lived in Arabia. Merchants from India brought their methods of recording numbers with them. The Arabs at first did not want to adopt this form of writing because they already had their own. There was one Arab scholar that appreciated the Arabic numerals and wrote a book on the subject. About 1,000 years ago, the book went into Europe. So eventually, the Hindu form of writing found its way into Europe. Since it came from Arabia, it is called the Arabic numerals. In 1450, many years later, there was something called the printing press invented. This helped situations immensely. The chances for mistakes in writing were much less, and people spent less time on their numerical writing. Actually, people took a courageous change to Arabic numerals. So now I have told you some history, and you know how our present-day symbols for numbers originated, starting with the Babylonians, then the Egyptians, then the Greeks, then the Romans, and then movement from there. So there's the story. And again, you'll have your charts. There's no need to give them a chart on every single numeric system out there because that's part of planting these seeds of interest. You want to give them just enough information to get them excited about things and to begin exploring. But if you give them too much, then they won't go find out the information on their own. So I know that there's a lot of computer use now, but having books in the classroom as well as computers for them to look up information is important. Exhausting resources really is fulfilling to them. I found out this information from this book. Now I'm going to go in the computer and find out some more. The other fun thing about these little charts is that they can add and subtract the numbers. It's really super fun for them, especially when they become adept at adding and subtracting dynamically, also with multiplication. So they can add, subtract, give them lots of lessons on Roman numerals because, the Roman numerals are each number only goes up to 4 of something, and then 5 is 1 less than 5. 10 is 1 less than 10. So the 1 goes before the X. So you want to make sure that you give them lots of lessons on this and research it on your own so that you'll know what the accurate information is that you're giving. Write your story as one of your assignments and make sure that you create the charts. All right, the story of the coming of numerals. Now you've heard 3 great lessons. Exciting.